All right, welcome back to week 2 for the deer hair wing session. This week we're going to tie what's known as a tilt wing. You're not going to see a ton of these. They're kind of a chore to tie, but we're gonna go ahead and cover it. This is a parachute pattern, as you can see, and this will be actually the only fly that we do the entire session that's going to use feather hackle. We are going to do some deer hair hackle towards the end. What I have in the vise is a size 12 barbless dry fly hook, and one of the first things we want to do is get our material prepped. So I've actually already stacked and cleaned my tail as well as my wing, which is in my deer hair stacker here. And just so we don't have to go over that again, we kind of touched on that in week 1. One thing we want to do first, though, is gauge our hackle. So we want to have our hackle to be roughly down to the barb, or you can say undersize the hackle, because the post that we're going to build is actually pretty thick. And so as the diameter of the post is thicker, this hackle is actually going to push out farther on all sides. So we're going to use the same technique that we did last week. I'll go over again real quick in case you missed it. To gauge the deer hair, take your deer hair right off the hide, twist it by the tips so it compresses, and then you place that underneath the shank, between the bottom of the shank and the barb, so that you can start to gauge how much hackle you're using. It's going to be totally up to you on how much you want to use, although on this session, for this particular wing, I recommend undersizing a little bit because it'll be easier to control. The thicker this wing is, the more difficult it is. Sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera there. I'm going to be using some 8/0 thread, Simperfly dark mocha brown, size 8/0. We're using 8/0 just to show that you don't need all these super heavy threads to tie in deer hair wings. I'm going to start this about a bodkin width behind the eye. Leave us a little bit of room for a head. And I'm just going to actually wrap this back pretty much all the way to the back here, right where that bend starts. And this just gets us a good thread base, and it'll make things a little bit easier to tie in as we build this fly. So I'm going to bring my thread back forward to basically where I want the wing to sit. Now I want the wing to sit about 3 bodkin widths behind the eye. So it's going to be a short, stubby body. It's going to be a fuller thorax. And we really need to try to keep our thread out of this area right here for the thorax when we get to that point. I'm going to take my deer hair tail that I've already stacked and cleaned, and I'm going to hopefully show you a decent way to keep your deer hair tail from flaring open. And so we're going to start with our thread up front here. I want to measure the distance of the tail so it's about the length of the shank. Pardon me. And you can make this as short or as long as you like. That's totally up to you. I'm going to transfer the distance over to my left thumb, left index, and I'm going to pinch this down on top of the shank, like right where that thread ends, and I'm actually going to grab that hook. I can just place a thread wrap over. You can go either way. It doesn't matter which way you tie. I tie counterclockwise. I know some of you are like, this goofy guy again. We're just going to place a couple wraps in to get this guy on top of the shank. Pull up. It's going to flare. And we just draw this out of the way. Back forward. One thing we're going to rely on heavily here is wetting our fingertips and getting this deer hair out of the way. So just wet your fingertips, get the deer hair out of the way. Now we're going to evenly open spiral this thread back over the deer hair till we get to the back. Now, if you start to run out of thread, do not pull down. Do not pull up. It's going to get the back end of this tail to flare. Just simply untwist it like this with your fingers until you have the amount of thread that you need. Okay, and on this very last thread placement, you want to start to draw this tail out to the back and place 2 loose wraps over to get it to lay pretty much even with the shank right here. You see I got a couple that are wanting to stick up. Now when we tighten this down, again, don't pull. Just collect your wing. One thing you can do here that will really help that tail sit down. I keep saying wing because we're in the wing session. But one thing you can do here for this tail is collect everything and then just place a drop of glue right over the back right there. Let gravity take that down into the hair. And as that's soaking in, you can just kind of give it a second, but then you can start to form it a little bit. And that's just one little tip that you can use. You want to be careful so you don't glue the whole tail shut. So just be careful. Now as we wrap this forward, we're going to spiral wrap it just like we did at the back, but we're going to spiral wrap it forward. And once we get past the second turn of thread right here, we'll be able to start to lock this down. So gently over. Once we get past that, once it start to move, just hold it in place. Now we can lock it down, and it'll keep this tail from flaring, right? So it's still sitting out back, and now we can tighten all this down. When we get to the front, we can trim all this out. If you want to make it nice and clean, what you can actually do is just kind of rip it out. It's hard for me to do with the camera in my way, but that's something you can do. But other than that, we're just going to trim that out. We're going to tie that down. You want to get this hair as close as you can to the shank. It just makes it easier later on. There you go. And let's go ahead and tie all this down. Back off a little bit. Got a bug getting zapped back there. That time of year. Now, as we work to the back, we're going to tighten this down. Methodically place your thread wraps here nice and tight. And when we get back into that tail, you can see I'm still holding this in place. When we get back to that tail, you're going to loosen up on your turns, because we don't want that hair to flare if we can help it. Now the reason it's kind of such a big deal is because the way we set this wing is it's going to lay down a little bit, and it's going to want to combine with your tail. Now if your tail is sitting a little south like mine is, what you can do is just gently bring your thread up underneath, lift the tail up, bring it up underneath, pull around front, and then tighten it back down. You can see how it wants to flare again. So it's because of the tension that you're putting on it. And so just be careful. Okay. Now for the body work, you can really do whatever you want. You can use dubbing, you can do quill body from like a peacock eye, biots. I mean, really whatever you want to do for the body work. I'm just going to use some dry fly dubbing. This is just brown Wapsi super fine dubbing. You want to keep it super wispy. And you still see, I guess you can't. I was just looking on the camera. I guess you can't see it on the camera, but you can still see that thread coming through. So you should be able to see it at home. Now when we place a few wraps over, again, just nice and loose for the first few turns. And as you come forward, you can tighten it up a little bit and build your taper. Oops. Put a little bit of a bubble in there. Try to avoid that if I can. Okay. So we should be sitting something just about like this. Pardon me. You know, a drink of water. Okay. Throat was just getting a little dry. Next, we're going to take our wing, and this is where it becomes a real challenge. So we're going to take our wing. We've stacked it. We've cleaned it. It looks good. You want to get that concave side facing down if possible, so that the wing is kind of hovering over the back. You want the wing to sit about the length of the shank, or just past the bend. We're going to take that, pinch it out. Now I've cleaned and stacked this probably 3 or 4 times. You want to make sure you're getting it pretty good. And you can do an elevated pinch wrap if you need to here, like we did last week. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to lay it down right on the shank. I want to pinch right above where my thread is. I'm going to put 2 wraps over, make sure everything's collected. I can seat it where I want it. And now I'm going to pull up slowly. Do not let pressure off of this wing. Make sure your wing is pinched down to that hook the whole time we do this. And we're going to place a few thread wraps through the hair coming forward to help lock it in. This wing is notorious for wanting to shift until like the fly is totally done. And it can be a real pain. So as you're wrapping through this hair and you're grabbing it, pulling down, pull up, if you need to, angle your bobbin towards the back. We want to keep the impression of the thread as small as possible through this. And again, we're going to lick our fingers, and we're going to start to collect all of this frontal deer hair, all the stuff we're going to eventually cut out. And we want to be able to grab this reasonably easily. And so we're going to collect it. We want to make sure it's all on the top side of the shank. And you can see how far it's coming up into the eye. That's already kind of a bad position for it to be in. I'm going to let go of that wing, grab this front part. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to take my thread, put it around the front, and pull to the back. That's how you can eliminate that. My wing's just sitting a little bit far forward. Okay, now you can see how those 2 wings, how the wing and the tail want to merge. So what we're going to do here to make this simple is because we already have all this collected. We're going to place a wrap over, bring it around, up and above the shank. So we're creating sort of like if you're going to do split wings, how we're wrapping thread around the base of this. You want to pull that tight and do it again to make sure that it's all collected. Now before you pull tight, make sure it's sitting where you want it. And as your wing moves, don't worry about it. We can groom that and get to it later. This is probably some of the reasons why this wing is not used a ton. I'm going to place a couple of wraps right in front. Okay. Now we're going to split that wing. We're going to split the 2 sides of the wing. We're going to grab the wing, lick my fingers, pull it up, get my thread back into the middle, and now we're going to do the same thing to the back side, where the thread is coming in between, around and then in between everything. So to start, we can just lift this up. You got to separate that tail. Make sure everything's on the top side, or just about anyway. I've almost got all of them. Got that one that's just going to stay below. So we're going to come around, and you can stop. Now again, a lot of you tie clockwise. I tie counterclockwise. It just means your thread's going to be on the back side. Bring your thread up and over. So we're splitting and keeping this apart. That's the goal, is to keep this apart. Now they're going to be combined, but what we're doing is we're building a base on each section that's going to help build the post. And so as you get better at this, you can move a little faster. I can move a little faster if I don't ramble on so much, which I'm notorious for doing. But I guess that's kind of part of the process of explaining things. As you get, I want to make sure I'm trying to be thorough, not trying to annoy you. Okay, so now you can see we clearly have different sides. If you've got anything underneath, or where you are in a position you don't want it to be in, this is where you want to come get rid of that. Trim it out, clean it up, do all this stuff. So we have two separate sides. You can actually see where the thread, the base of the thread for the posts is. So now, again, lick your fingers, draw both sides up, and now we're going to start with our thread coming up around the top to capture all of it together. And once you've got your first full turn in, make sure you pinch this guy so it doesn't pull. And we're going to tighten it. You can see I'm shaking the thread. That's me actually putting tension on my bobbin coming out front. You can see this wing wants to move. We're going to fix this here in just a second. And we're just going to work this guy down. The cleaner you have your post, the cleaner your hackle will likely be. And so like one of the pain in the butts is this wing just totally wants to move. One of the other things about it though is this wing totally wants to move, and so it sort of makes it easier at the same time. So now you can see how we have everything lined up right here. Now, if you decide to pursue some of these patterns, again, I mean, obviously the wing's kind of a pain, so most people don't. But if you do, this is the place where you want to turn this over and glue the bottom side. And we're going to go ahead and do that here in just a second. I did have another point and I lost it. Okay. So before I do this, I'm going to pull everything back and wrap right into the base of that post. Nice and tight wraps. Hopefully you can hear that thread stretching so that everything stays nice and consistent and together. Now if you get better, I'll go back to the point that I'd forgotten. Once you start getting better at this, you can actually clip this out right now because you don't really need it from here on out. I don't mind just leaving it in just so that I've got something to grab, because there's not really any rush on us getting it out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and take my super glue, invert the fly, and I just want to just lightly dab the bottom and the sides. And I'm going to leave it here for just a second so that the glue is going to use gravity and leach down into that post. Now at the end of this job, the wing should be stable. It's just kind of a pain in the butt to get the darn wing stable. Okay. So at this point, this is basically what we want to see. Nice and clean both ways. Okay, we want to have our thread on the front side of the post. And now we're going to get the hackle that we had already sized. Now we're going to tie this in so that the hackle, first you can see that I've got it stripped off so that I'm tying in just stem. And what we want to do is make sure that the hackle is laying next to, like vertically, right? So it's flat and in line with the two wings and not laying flat like this. So as you're viewing it, it's to its side and not flat. We also have got to get this stem to the top of the post. what I like to do, and there's different strokes for different folks, and so I'm sure some of you will say I like to do it this way, and that's cool. But I like to go ahead and line this up so that my hackle stem is just above my post before I tie it in. You're going to have to get your hands closer than I've got mine now. And if the feather's bugging you, pinch it like this, cup the rest of it in your hand, and it'll keep it all out of the way. And you can still use your fingers to get close. Right where you want it to be. Oops. Now that stem's going to want to roll. I'm going to put about 3 turns in. You can see I've still got that stem right there hanging off the side of the eye. That's okay. I'm just going to lift this up and combine it with everything. Lift it all up. Get that tail out of the way. That tail is a real pain. It's a real deal. So now we're going to wrap this up the post again. We may have to trade hands to do this. There's just a lot to collect and move up there, and once you've got it started, you can kind of lock it in place fairly easily. And bring that down. Again, I'm going to put my thread to the front side, and I'm going to create a dubbing loop. Just take your finger. I'm going to do this the other way. Just take your finger and split the thread so that it's into the shape of a U. If you can see this, it's in the shape of a U. We've got it right here. We're going to wrap this up underneath. Give yourself a couple of inches. Twist your thread around that dubbing loop. Lock it down. Bring it to the back. That's where things get a little finicky because you got so much stuff in the way. So we have something about like this. You want to get it right back to where that abdomen stops, or into the thorax. Trying to keep all that out of my way. Take your scissors, come in and trim out the one side of that dubbing loop. Now for this, I'm going to use some peacock herl. So I'm just going to pull a couple out. I'm going to cut out the tips. So I've got something about like that. Now I want to line this up so that you can see that it's just to the front side of this wing and the post. And the reason for that is if you get too close, these little flues, that's the green stuff that you see coming off. These little flues are going to want to get in the way. And you can actually, if you wanted to, you could tie this peacock herl in first before you do your hackle. Either way is really up to you. Normally I actually do it the other way, where I tie the thorax in first. I got anxious. So we're going to bring this forward. And you kind of, again, exit or figure eight it to help keep it all in place. So now we've got all this stuff all over the place. And that just means we're ready to finish building a really cool fly. Take your 2 peacock herls and your piece of string or your piece of thread. If you can, use a pair of hackle pliers, and we're just going to start to twist. This is called core twisting. And what it does is that thread's reinforcing this entire herl. And as you're twisting this up, you want to make sure that you're not twisting the whole thing, because these will pop. The thread won't pop, but the herl will. So we want to leave it nice and fluffy. If your herl is sitting down, like if you're using strung herl, sometimes it wants to just really lay flat. Take a little toothbrush and move against the grain, like the flues go in one direction, brush against that, and it'll help pop them open. So what we're going to do is we're going to place about 2 wraps or so in the back. I got that one little fiber sticking off the side. If I was tying a nymph, I'd be proud. That tail out of my way. Usually it's just about 2 wraps to the back side, and I'm going to make another twist. I'm going to lift everything back as far as the wing portion is concerned. I'm going to lift everything to the back and come forward, bringing it right in and tight. You can see how my hand's moving around to the back side, not down. We're trying to keep all that flu out of the eye. And I'm going to come underneath. So I'm coming around underneath. I'm going to go back up and over. Also bringing it tight into the back side of that wing. Now what this is doing, because we're kind of creating this like figure X, and it's covering the bottom of the thorax, which otherwise is hard to do. It's very difficult if you're going to bring it, just palmer it forward. So we're just going to grab this, again, pull it in tight. Now this is where it becomes a bit of a challenge, because this is going to want to snap off. You're right behind the eye. This is one reason I like to leave this in place, because I can grab it, I can move, and this kind of acts as like a shield. Like it literally, I can grab all of this and just pull it out of the way. If you've pre-cut this, which you can do when you get better at tying this style wing, if you ever continue to do so, you can just cut that off there. So what I want to do is I want to bring this to the opposite side. Sorry, that hair's in the way. I want to bring it to the opposite side of the shank. I want to tie this off on the side. And you can tie it off on either side. I don't recommend that you try to tie it off so that the herl's coming directly out front. You're already going to have issues. You can see how all this flu is wanting to come over the eye. You're already going to have issues with that. It's just kind of the nature of tying in peacock herl this tight. But we're going to place a few thread wraps in. Again, pull your thread to the back to clean all this stuff out. And you only need about 3 or 4 wraps before you're good to go, and then we can cut this out. You're not going to be able to pull it off like you would a lot of peacock herl, just because that piece of thread's in there, and that's just not. You're not going to be able to rip that thread off. So to kind of save your work, what you can do right here, because this part is really hard, right? And so what you can do is you can take your half hitch tool, place that hole right over the eye, and then just place a double half hitch knot right down on up in there to save the eye. If you're struggling with it up front here, and you can even do 2 if that flu is really getting in your way. Don't be afraid to like place your half hitch over that flu to help get it out of the way. And all we're doing is we're just locking that down so it's in, so we can manage it with it, or manage it later. So now we're going to lift everything up, and it's time to hackle this fly. We're going to come up, over, and around. We're going to start our hackle right up top, just like any parachute, and we're going to try to beef it up as it comes down. We don't need a ton of hackle in here. 3 or 4 turns is usually more than enough because we got deer hair to keep it buoyant. Again, we're going to tie this off over on the side. So see if I can turn this to the side. So as my hackle comes over to the side, again, I tie counterclockwise. You may have to go the other way. We're just going to lift all that hackle up. You can lick your fingers and just lift it up and out of the way so that we're tying it in off on one of the sides and not directly above your eye or directly below your eye. You want to keep that up and out of the way. This is more of a traditional style. I'll be honest with you, I don't tie a ton of traditional style parachutes. So I'm going to trap a few barbs here, but that's okay. We can lift all this up. Yeah, I got a couple trapped there. And we're going to work that back over that stem, keeping tension on your bobbin. And now you can pull that out. Don't you do it. I'm going to get rid of these few right here. Super careful. And then to finish it, I almost always wet whip, and then we can groom the fly and get it looking good. I got a couple other videos on different fly patterns that use the tilt wing. Mahogany dun comes to mind for sure. Again, this, oh, don't you do it. This style of wing is not horribly popular. If you've made it this far, I applaud you. You can probably start to see why that many people don't do this style of wing. There's much easier styles. And we're going to get into more of those in the next week. It won't get tough again until about week 6 when we actually do something similar to this, but we're going to build the whole entire fly out of deer hair. So we've got everything in place. We've basically got the fly done. Now I can take all of this, and you see we can easily separate the two sides. And I'm just going to bring my thread in here. You can make this head as big or as short as you want. I like to get close. We're just going to trim that out. Like so. Let me go ahead and get my pinch scissors because I got a couple of tail fibers trapped underneath that I want to get rid of. Let's try to make the bug look nice. And so you can kind of groom all this down how you like so. And then there's a good chance you're going to mess your hackle up a little bit when you build this, and so just take your fingers and pull it back out. It's going to be willing to come back out for you. Also, if you've clipped your wing too short or really close, kind of like I've done here, it doesn't hurt to take a little bit of super glue and just dab the top of it, and that's going to help support that wing even more. Because the wing it is a little bit of a floppy wing, unfortunately, but now you can see, like I was telling you, like once you've actually built the entire fly, that wing stays in place and it's not wanting to shift and roll from side to side. And so you really got to get to the end of the fly before that starts to happen. So holding your wing and pinching tight, pinching the shank, these are all really good techniques that you're going to need to really focus on. And those techniques will apply to a lot of things too when you're tying, making sure you're really holding your material down, not letting it move. So it's good practice on a complicated wing. Your wing should be sitting directly up top over the shank, in line with your tail, and have it just slightly flared to show a mayfly wing. So all right, well, that's week 2. Next week, it's going to be a little bit easier. We're going to move into like a Bob Wyatt style deer hair emerger wing. And we're going to play around a little bit with using deer for dubbing. Probably not something a lot of you have done, so we're going to get into that a little bit. And so make sure you check that out. And then, as always, everybody, thanks for following along. Appreciate you. Happy tying. Take care. And I'll see you next week.